Hi everyone, I'm gonna try and show you how I make my no waste feeders with the trim coil. I got the trim coil here. Trim coil comes in lots of different sizes. This one is, let's see, 6-inch trim coil. 6-inch trim coil works great for these projects because it's easy to manipulate and move around when you need to cut it. But what you're gonna need is cardboard. It's right here so that you can do your templates. Thin cardboard works best. You can use like a cereal box, that type of cardboard, the really thin. My husband got a good number of these from where he used to work a while ago. So that'll work perfectly as long as it'll fit inside here. Cutting it down is fine. Reminds me I need scissors. Okay, scissors. I'm trying to get all the stuff I need out here. So you're going to need scissors, your cardboard. You're going to need some tin snips to cut the trim coil. My favorite are the straight ones. I got the 3-pack with the left facing, right facing, and straight. I don't know where my straight ones are, so I'm right-handed, so I'm using these ones so that when I cut, it'll be cutting into the material. Just something to look at. Pliers, because we're going to need those to flatten down the holes. Implements, I got a pen and a permanent marker. Zip ties, because that's how we attach the trim coil to the feeder after we drill holes. So we have a wood block, sacrificial wood block, so we can drill into so that we don't mess up the desk. Have my cordless drill. This drill bit is just big enough for the zip ties, so it doesn't need to be a super big drill bit, but it also can't be too small, otherwise the zip ties are not going to fit. So the way I make sure that it's the right size is I just get the zip tie that I want to use, and then I actually just place it right on the bit. And if I see a little bit of the drill bit on both sides, then I know that the zip tie will be able to go through the hole perfectly and it won't be too caught up, because if the zip tie snags on a hole that's too small for it, it will just snap the zip tie. So I know that from experience. Tape measure and some tape in case I need it to keep stuff together in place. And that is basically it for what you're going to need. So I haven't done one of these in a while, so bear with me for a second. Might have to edit some of this out. But you're basically going to want to see how wide you need it. So I'm going to be using this edge as a straight edge here, so I'm going to put that on the inside. And then I'm going to mark just on the inside of this one. It might be better just to use a regular ruler for this. This is about 1 1/8 inches in. It could go in a little bit more, so we could do 1 1/4 inches in. So I'm just going to measure that. So do 1 1/4 inches. Then we're going to do 1 1/4 inches on this side. Trying to make sure that's possible. And then, oh, we need a straight edge to connect it. So now we have a couple of marks. Use something as a straight edge to connect as many lines as we can. Doesn't have to be perfect. We already know this is going to be slightly undersized, so that's good. So we can go ahead and cut this out. Okay, probably don't need this anymore. So we know that this will fit in here. Well, since we're using this as a template, we basically want it to be a little bit up from the bottom so that some of the food can get through. And then we're going to want to cut out some spaces so that the food can fall through. I'm going to try and make 3 holes for the birds' heads to get in. So that means that 3 feeder holes should be pretty good for that. And then this doesn't need to go all the way to the top here. We kind of just need it to go about halfway, because then we can zip tie it right here. And this goes in there, so yeah. So about here would be good for the zip ties. So we can just make a mark, and we'll figure out what that measurement is, and we can cut that off. So we'll just mark this so we know this is going to be the bottom. See how much this is. That is about 4 inches perfectly, so make some marks at 4 inches here, and we can cut that off. So that's going to work. Yeah, that's my 4 inch marks. Okay, so we're gonna cut that off. Okay, so we're going to keep that piece. Okay, next we need to figure out the top cover. What we want is, when this is going to be inside of here, see, it's going to go inside. It's going to drop down there. Raise it up a little bit. We're going to put 2 holes in here so we can zip tie it so it stays up. We also want this to be able to be held by those zip ties if possible. So, holes are going to be here. So we know that's going to be that high. So we want this to be flanged up at least that much. So that means it needs to be flanged about half of this, which was 2 inches. But we want to make sure it goes up. So probably going to say 3 inches here. We want that to have a bend in it. And this, of course, does not have to be exact. It just has to, the zip ties just have to be able to hit it. This is going to be the end. Okay. So that's going to bend up inside of there. And then this folds over here. You can kind of see what that measurement is going to look like. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to put 2 holes in here and put a zip tie in here to hold this down. You're going to want to like that. So what it's going to do is it's going to go inside, and then it's going to go underneath this metal flange here. That's built into this. Put our 2 holes here so we can zip tie it. Then we're going to have our 3 holes in here, so that the birds can eat. So this is basically the template. And then if you're just doing it with cardboard, then you would, you know, cut the holes out of this guy and you would tape it up and it would be fine. And the cardboard works for if you only have like 3 birds in a cage, because they're not going to be rough on it. But if you've got more birds, like I'll put this 7.5 inch feeder in with a breeding set, which is, you know, 6 to 8 birds. So they can get a little rough on it. So since we now have our sizes here, we can then just put them on the trim coil and then cut the trim coil out. Let me get this out of the way for a second. So yeah, this piece does look a little big, but for all of what it needs to do, it's actually the right size. Okay, so trim coil comes in lots of different sizes. This is the 6 inch trim coil. It works pretty good for this. There will be some waste. There's always waste when you're doing projects. This one, actually, let me go see if my 10 inch trim coil might work better. Okay, so this is actually, I had a couple sizes of trim coil. I have 6 inch wide, 10 inch wide, and 24 inches wide. This one is 10 inches wide. So you can see, got a little bit less waste with this way. So we can use one of the sides, the factory edges, as one of our sides here, so we don't have as much cutting to do. What we're going to want to do is take our Sharpie. Usually the thinnest is better so that you can have a more accurate cut. So that's one piece, and then our next piece. And the great thing about using the template and cutting it all out of one big sheet like I did is that you have the same width, which is what you're going to need because you're going to be inside of the feeder. And then we're going to mark right here is a bend and right here is a bend, so that we can measure that out and then put those bends in there. So we actually want to do, mark that on the inside, and then we'll follow those through over here. So since this is being unruly, I'm just gonna cut it out off camera and then come back on. Or not, you should probably see how unruly it is. It's not terrible to work with. Just trying to keep it in place for videoing has its own fun. So these snips really cut the trim coil really well. It's best to use smaller snips. And beware of your fingers. Do not drag your like when you're cutting with scissors, you tend to drag your fingers across the bottom. Don't do that with this because this is metal. It will cut your fingers open. Hopefully not terribly bad, but it will happen. You don't really cut straight up and down with the tin snips like you do with the scissors. I was kind of holding it at an angle. That's one, so I can better see my line, but you can cut a little bit straighter when it's like that. And because it's got all these different hinges and springs and all this other stuff, so the way you use the tin snips is a little different than you would scissors. Okay. So now, this piece was this one here. And this piece was this one here. And since I like this side that's cut better than this side, we're going to have this side be our feed ports. And those don't have to be, you know, exactly even. But they should try to be, because we're going to be trying to put our feeders in there. So this is 7 1/4. Can you do 7 1/4 divided by 3? So that equals 2.41. So we're going to go 2 3/8. We'll just do that from each side. So 2 3/8. And from this side also 2 3/8. Okay, you can see that pretty much makes it into about equal thirds. So I'm just going to write that. 2 3/8 inches from each side. So what we're going to want to do actually is that's where our 3 are going to, we're sectioning it, but then we need to actually divide that in half. So it would be 1 3/16. So 1 2 3, that one there. One 3/16. There. And then this middle one, since it is different, we're going to see here, so that is 2 1/2. So we're going to go to 1 1/4, which is right here. Okay. those are the spots that we're actually going to be cutting our triangles out of. How big is this? Oh, what do you know? You know that strip we cut off earlier from the cardboard? It's going to be the perfect size that we want. So we are just going to put that on the edge and draw a line. So that's 1 and that's 5/16. So we're going to go half plus 3, half plus 3. Okay. No, that's really off. So the video cut out at an important part. We made this mark that's in the middle of our 1¼ cardboard, and then this mark is 1 inch down from here. So draw that across. We're going to cut those 2 pieces out so we have a triangle. Looks like a little picket fence. Okay? And pretend this was our trim coil here. We made the mark, let's just say, at the 1¼ inch. And then we have our 3 marks where we want to have our holes at. We're going to line this line up on the bottom, and we're going to line this line up with the vertical line here. We're going to cut out or draw out our triangles so that the food can get through for the coils. Okay, and then we're going to cut that out with tin snips. I trimmed those triangles out with the tin snips. Okay, but if you don't want to have all of the gobbledygook looking out to make it look pretty, just put the other side down, showing because it should be symmetrical. And then when you actually zip tie this up, you're going to want to make sure it's up a little bit so that a little bit of food can free flow down, but it's not, you know, overly crazy. The whole point of this is to reduce the amount of food that your birds will get so that they don't just tear it out and waste it, so they have less access. So without this, this whole tray would fill completely up with food, and then they could just scratch it out. And then you're wasting food. This reduces the amount of food that they have access to, so they can still get their head in here and they can peck and they can eat it off of the tray. They just can't, and even if they dig with their beaks, it won't fill this all the way up. So that's the purpose of this. So the next part is the cover. I call it the cover. Now we have those marks on there. They correspond with these bends here. And yes, another thing I love about the trim coil is it is easy to bend. But we just want to make sure that we're putting our marks and everything in the right place. Yeah, 3. So this flange here, the top flange that goes inside of the feeder, is 3 inches down. So we want to make sure that we measure 3 inches down. And then we can have that be marked out for us. So we know this is the bend. I like doing dashes for bends. And then from that flange, we have 5.5. Okay. Now this section here is where the 3 holes are going to go. So we need to use basically the same measurements as this. So it's not a bad idea just to overlay it so you can get the holes in relatively the same spot. Yeah, I'm just going to make a mark here because that's where the top of that is. I'll go around to the other side. We're just going to mark it there so we can get a good, nice crosshair. Okay. Now that is literally nothing other than just the marks that we can use to get a straight line. Okay. And then what we need to do is figure out what the middle of the spacing is. So if we put our mark there, that's 2.5 inches. So we're going to need 1.25 inches from this bottom line here, which 1.25 inches, if you remember, is the size of this extra piece here. So we can just lay that down. Make sure it's on the factory edge side that we can then just draw across. And now we have our 3 crosshairs. So you can see there. Our 3 crosshairs where the center of our holes are going to be. This is just a guide point. The holes themselves, we may want to put these inner holes in a little bit more. Because if you think about where it's going to sit on the feeder itself, it might be too close to the end flanges. It might be fine. Okay, so here's a bottle cap, and it's 1.5 inches. So you can see it, 1.5 inches. And this is off of a just a supplement bottle. So it doesn't have to be any special type of cap or anything. So it's 1.5 inches. We're going to want to place that on the crosshairs as evenly as we can. And then we just trace around it. And 1.5 inches works really good for quail because they can get their head in there with room to spare, and it's not going to be too cramped. They're not going to cut themselves. It gives enough space. Anything bigger is kind of just a waste. I mean, you can totally use the 1 3/4 inch cap if that's all you have. But yeah, squared off the bottom. So that they could get into it a little bit easier. So it wasn't a circle. I made them actually into I used the circle as a template. And then I actually made them into a little pentagon here. Like a little house shape. Because what I found was it was hard for me to actually cut a good circle out. If you have a drill attachment that does a perfect circle, that's like 1.25 inches, by all means, please use that. Because that would probably be the easiest. I don't have that. So what I decided was best for what I had available was to drill a small hole in here and then actually take the tin snips and cut to those corners from the circle, from the drilled hole. And then what I would do is just bend those back with the pliers. So it probably would make more sense if I just showed that to you. So. That's a big hole. I usually use a big hole to get the tin snips in. But I guess it's working. And it's working. This is what I did before. See how I'm cutting on the lines to the corners there? I don't want to go too far outside of that circle because we know that's the size that we want. Okay, so then we have something like that. And here's where you need to figure out which side that you want the birds to have facing them. Do you want the nice pretty side like this showing? Well, then you're going to want to bend all of these in this way, so then this is what you see on the outside. So I think that's what I'm going to do with this one. So I'm just going to take this and we're going to bend it. Be careful. This is where you can also use your pliers to grab, and then you can make a decent corner there. Now, at this point, you can also trim these back. See how much space, how much is there? You don't need that much there. You can trim that. I usually just lay this on here and then cut so it has a little bit. That little bit, then you can, oh, that was the other thing I forgot, is the hammer. So you can actually hammer that all the way flat, so then there's a nice smooth edge for the birds so that they don't get cut on anything. You're definitely going to want to make sure that these get trimmed down here because that would overlay with that, and that's where we're supposed to have a bend. And we don't want that to interfere with the bend. Same thing over here. You're going to want to trim this back because this is the very edge of the feeder, so you can't have anything go past there. Now again, if you have a circle drill bit that's 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches, like that would work out perfectly for this. I probably should have went and bought one because then you wouldn't have to worry about anything. You can just file down the edges a little bit or put a little bit of tape on it. So, but this is, from what I have on hand, this is the easiest I can do. Okay. And then it would be best to get a hammer to flatten this out. Now, you don't want to pull too hard because then it might start ripping the trim coil. And that would defeat the purpose a little bit. And then that's what it looks like on the other side. So that would be the feeder port for the bird. So if you want to edge this with some tape, you can do that too, but this feeder port is big enough to where there's not really any issues. And I've had these on my feeders for my other birds for, gosh, at least 9 months, and they're all fine. But so then we just do that with the other ones. I forgot to do all my markings. And it's definitely good to have your markings with this. Otherwise, you might go too far, and it's just not, good. You want to make sure they all match up? Now will be the time to get all of them together here. So we're just using that circle as a template. We're not actually cutting the circle out, but we know that that's the size we need to make sure that the birds can get into the food correctly. And remember, we did these crosshairs before we did the circles, so we know that the crosshairs are in the right placement. You know, circle off a little bit. That was just for a little bit. Okay. Remember, this this drill bit I have on here is for the zip ties, so it's a little small for these holes. I would actually try and do like maybe a 1/2 inch hole or something here so that it's big enough for the tin snips to get through. I'm just going to drill a couple of holes so I don't have to change my drill bit out. And that way the tin snip should be able to get into the middle of here. They don't have to be perfect, they just have to work. So that's what that looks like. So we're going to trim those down a little bit. You mostly want to trim off the extra curl. Like when you start trimming with the tin snips, it curls the metal a little bit. You can't really flatten that very well. So if you can at least just cut that extra curl off and then a little bit extra metal, that should be enough. To get it flat. So remember, see how that's going over that line a little bit? So we need to trim a little bit more off of this one, because that's where we're going to need this to curl, to bend. So we're going to need to trim this one a little bit more. I should go get my hammer to the side. And if you've got one side that's cut lower than the others, you should start pounding on that side to control where it goes a little better. And we've got 2 holes. Start the 3rd one. So getting those pieces out of the way makes it a little easier to cut this top peak part. And having these pliers that have the blunt nose on the end here, it really allows you to make sure that you get it right at that edge and get it flat. See how I didn't start at the narrow point, and so now it's going to be sticking up a little bit? And that's the 3rd one. Okay. So now what we need to do is, we know that these are going to go this way in there. Okay, they're going to be flat in there. So we know that at this flange here, we're going to bend it that way. So that's going to go inside. Oh, I did what I didn't want to do. So be careful, because this is going to be a little bit flimsy. So you might want to put it up on the edge of your desk, of your workspace, line that up, and start bending it. Otherwise, you're going to bend where the feeder ports are, and that's going to be no good. So see how I just little bits of bending at a time, and I've got that at a near 90-degree angle. Flat, and I can adjust it. Now for this other one, we want it to bend the other way. So I'm going to need to just try and get it as close on that line as possible. Okay, and you don't want that one at a 90. You can rebend this one back. You don't want that one at a 90. Because this is going to go in this way, and then we want this on the inside, down here. So we want that to match this angle. That's kind of a 90 actually. But we want it to get in there as close as possible. And see how close that is to the flange here? So that's good. And then this will bend up inside of there. So that's flange there. And with the zip tie, it'll keep it tight to the front. So what we're going to want to do now is drill a couple of holes. I'm kind of marking these holes in between the feeder ports just for some type of a reference. If you want an actual reference, that's 2 1/4 that side, and that's 2 1/2. So anywhere between 2 1/2 and 2 1/4. If we want, we can, I think 2 1/2 works a little bit better. Yeah, so if you want to have a measurement there, make it 2 1/2. And then down is about 1 inch. So if you want to crosshairs, so it's going to be 2 1/2 in from the edge and then 1 inch down, and you'll definitely hit your trim coil on the inside. And then we're also going to have to, actually, I think I am going to bend this a little bit more. You can always unbend it too. You want to make sure you have a nice tight bend, and then you can always unbend it as long as you didn't hammer it flat. If you want, you can also trim these very corners off just a little bit to make sure it's going to sit flat inside there. It's a little chamfer on the ends. You can also chamfer this a little bit because you can see how this one is cut. It's a little bit wonky. So chamfering the very corners isn't going to change anything except maybe making it fit a little bit easier in there. Okay, so that is that. So that's good. And then we have our feeder one. So this is going to go, you can see that in there. This is going to go behind it. Okay. We kind of need to see how far up both of these pieces go. So we know that this one, the reducer actually, I don't know if you can tell, but it's up past the cover flange a little bit. So we'll use the cover flange as our basis here. So we can tell at what distance we need to make those holes. So we know that this is, say, 2 inches down. So we want to be further than 2 inches down. So we've got a total of 5 inches here. So might want to go up from, so it looks like this 3-inch mark would be a good place for our zip ties. Now you guys could just eyeball this too if you don't want to do an actual measurement with all these things. Like, that's totally cool. That's how I made my first ones. Like that's legit. So it really is just up to you, like what you, if you want to sit here and do this measuring to make them all the same, and you know, you can totally do that. Okay. So I've got my 4 marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, where I'm going to put my zip ties. Again, that was 2.5 inches in. And down here, this was 1 inch from the rollover flange, and this was 3 inches from the top, and 2 inches from the very bottom. So 3 inches from the top of here. So we can take these out. This is where we're going to be drilling. Of course, use your proper PPE. I just got this wood block back here so that it gives it something to drill into. That's my sacrificial wood block. Otherwise, it would be, I'd be having to hold it up with my fingers, which I've done before, but that is not proper safety etiquette. I got these holes. Okay, now comes an interesting part. First, get rid of the metal shavings so they don't burrow into your arms. Into the trash can. Okay. So now we're going to put this together. And then we're going to actually mark where these holes need to be on the trim coil. Make sure everything's tight. We know that's where that hole needs to be. That hole needs to be. I'm gonna know where these holes need to be. Okay. So you can see you've got the holes on where the holes are supposed to be marked. Do the same thing for your reducer. And this is good, so you can kind of, without the cover in there, you can see how far up from the bottom you're going. And as long as you have the holes in the proper place, it will line up with the zip ties. So it doesn't really matter if you do them together or not. But so then we're going to be drilling the trim coil holes. Now, trim coil is pretty thin, so you don't have to go too crazy on it. Okay. Put out nozzles. And that one now has its 4 holes. The first piece we're going to want to do is definitely this bottom one here, because that's going to be a little tricky. Now there's 2 ways to go about this. There's the easy way and then there's the hard way. The easy way is just to have the actual cable tie nub is on the outside, and that's perfectly fine. It could be a little sharp for your birds. I don't think it's an issue. Or you can try and hide it on the inside, and that is doable. It is a little tricky. It looks nicer overall, but it really doesn't matter because it's going to be on the inside of your cage. So, I'm going to get a zip tie that has a flat thing. There we go. So, got to make sure that it's pushed up in there and that it... Oh, just so you know, cable ties go this way, okay? If you go the other way, it's not going to latch. So when you put this in here, you have to make sure it's going in the right way, because if you do your holes right, your cable ties can't really turn in the holes very well, especially when they're through the secondary hole. So see how it gets tight all of a sudden? So you can do it this way and then tighten it as much as you can, and that's perfectly fine. I think I'm just going to do that for this video. If you want to mess with it the other way, by all means, go right ahead. See, and that is nice and tight. And then we can actually use our tin snips to snip this off. And that is nice and secure down there, as you can see. Okay, so we've got those holes. They should line up right away. You can't really see them because they're actually lined up good. And then we have to, at the same time, line up our reducer with, we're going to zip tie that all at once. That's why we're using the same holes. So remember, this goes behind the cover. It goes behind it. And this is going to be a little tricky finagling it, but I actually do like putting this one on the inside because I know that the birds' heads are going to be up here and I don't want their heads to get cut on the cutoff end of the cable tie, which is totally a thing that can happen. So you're just going to want to go through the reducer and then the cover, and then you're going to go out through the feeder. And then you're going to go back through the other side. Okay, so you've got the two sides of the cable tie there, and then we're just going to tighten that up. I'm going to want to make sure that these are pushed down, and you want to start with the cable tie as far to one side, so that when you pull it, it cinches it and it's going to be moving over. Oh, thank you. But as you can see, so you've got the cover down there, you've got the reducer on top of it, you've got it cable tied. Okay, so now we are going to cinch this. And it's going to get tight. So now you've got the nice solid zip tie there so the birds can't hurt themselves, and you've got this tied tight in here. So we can take this and we can then snip this off. And now we have the metal, the trim coil, reducer, and cover. Oh, the next thing you can do with this, to make sure you don't get any food caught anywhere if you want to, is you can actually tape this edge, just so that the food, you know, will go back and in. You can totally do that. I usually actually do that. You can just use masking tape, use packing tape, duct tape, any type of tape. It doesn't really matter. It's just to keep the food from getting lodged in there and doing wonky stuff. Just creates a little bit of a seal. It's not doing anything structurally, it's just keeping food from popping underneath here. So there we go. I hope that helps someone and helps you reduce some feed waste from your birds. And just give me a comment if it's helpful for you or if it's not. And please like this video and subscribe if you can. I'm just a humble quail farmer, trying to help the masses. Okay, till next video. Bye-bye.